안녕하세요. 기드린이에요. 감사합니다 for your time today because today we are learning how to say thank you in Korean. Ready to get started? 맞아요. Let's dive in. How to say thank you in Korean. 감사합니다. 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 감사합니다 comes from the word kamsa, to thank, and hada, the verb that means to do. And when you conjugate hada, it becomes different formalities. Here it's in its most formal form, which is imda. This is the best way to say thank you for beginners because if you don't know what formality you should be speaking to someone in, this is the best way to say thank you. It'll be good to say to anyone, no matter what. Although it would be a little bit awkward to say to your friends because it is so formal, you can still get away with it if you can't remember any other way to say it. 감사합니다 is especially good for people who are strangers, for your boss, or people who are older than you. Gomapseumni. 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 Gomapseumni is almost exactly the same as 감사합니다. It comes from the verb 고맙다, which means to be grateful. And while some Koreans think that 감사합니다 is just slightly more formal, it's really used interchangeably. So it's really just up to you what your preference is, but it's good to know both because you'll hear both. So again, this one is best used with people you're not very familiar with, people who are older than you, or people who are higher status than you, especially like a boss. 고마워요. 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 Gomawo is the standard polite form of thank you in Korean, and this would probably be the most common way to say thank you to most people because typically you'll be speaking in standard polite speech most of the time. You could say gomawo with people who are like your acquaintances on the same level as you but really aren't quite your friends. That might be like coworkers or people you just kind of talk to on occasion. But when in doubt, if you don't know someone's age or which one you should be using, always err on the side of caution and go with 감사합니다 or 고맙습니다. By the way, 고마워요 comes from the same word 고맙다. It's just conjugated differently to be slightly less formal. And you'll see that again in the next phrase we're about to cover, but just know that you can't really do that with 감사합니다. It does have less formal versions of it, like 고마워요, but they're just not really said anymore. 고마워, 고마워, 고마워. Gomawo is the most casual, informal way to say thank you in Korean. This is best for people who you're close to, your family, your best buds, and people who are younger than you. But there is one note here. If you've studied Japanese like I have, then you may know that when you speak Japanese, you can't speak casually to people who are younger than you, even if you don't know them super well. In Korean, that's not the case. If you speak casually to someone who's younger than you and you don't know them at all, it will come across as rude. So even if they're younger than you, it's still best to use standard polite speech if you don't know them, and that even counts children. So it's just something to be more mindful of, but you can use this with anyone you're close to. So let's say you wanted to thank a friend for bringing you a cup of coffee. Then you would say, 네, 커피 저겨워 주셔서 고마워요. And you don't have to use gomawoyo at the end. You could change it to any of the thank yous that we said. You could change it to whichever the thank yous that you feel comfortable using. It could be 감사합니다 or gomapseumni, whichever you think fits the situation. Now, let's say you want to say thanks a lot or thank you so much. Well, then you would add either 정말 or 진짜 to the beginning of the word. So for instance, you would say 정말 감사합니다 to say thank you so much, or 진짜 고마워요, which means really thank you. Now, it's also good to know thank you in Korean slang and in Korean shorthand for text. So sometimes in Korean slang, you'll just hear kamsa for thank you because that means thank, as we discussed, and it's just short. And Koreans are all about shortening words to make them as easy to say as possible. That can also be true for even like 감사합니다. Sometimes it'll be squished together so tight you don't hear all the syllables, and it'll end up sounding something like 감사합니다. So you don't actually hear like the whole thing. Other times you'll even hear thank you, which is their way of saying thank you in English, and you might even hear it combined with some of the formal verb endings, even though that grammatically doesn't make sense. So you might hear thank you, nida. Now when it comes to text shorthand, you'll often see the first syllable of each of the Hangul blocks put together to make thank you in text. So what that looks like is it would be the K or G character and the S character, and then it put together to make Kamsa or 감사합니다. This is just like in English when we say TY for thank you. 맞아요. 감사합니다. Thank you for joining me today to learn how to say thank you in Korean. As always, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more Korean content and other language learning videos. Give this video a thumbs up, share it if you liked it, and leave me a comment below. What else would you like to learn in Korean? Until next time, 안녕히 가세요. Do you want to learn even more Korean? Well, then you need to check out Korean Class 101. Korean Class 101 is a Korean podcast that teaches everything you need to know about Korean. From travel phrases that you need to know to survive in Korea to all the phrases that you need to know to have your first conversation Korean, Korean Class 101 is the way to go. So make sure to check out the link in the description box for Korean Class 101 so that you can get started learning and speaking Korean today.